on this Sunday of the paralytic, we go to Bethesda. And I'm always slightly smiling on a Sunday like this because for those of us who have been so long in Wales, let alone for those of you who have spent your whole life in Wales, how many times have you passed chapels called Bethesda? And Bethesda, of course, is a place of transformation. When Jesus goes to Bethesda, it's very much a place of the Old Testament. And if we actually look at Bethesda itself, it's a symbol in some ways of the Old Testament. Here we have this pool with 5 porches, representative in some ways of the Torah, with its 5 books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The 5 pillars of the Old Covenant, of the Old Testament faith and spirituality. And in this symbolic setting that we can see to represent the Torah and the Old Dispensation, we have this miracle, but this rather limited miracle that happens but once a year, when that angel goes down and stirs the water, and it's only the first person who is able to get into these waters that actually receives any healing. Only the first person that partakes of the grace. There's something very limited and something very imperfect in this vision, especially when we look and we remember that one person is being healed at this miracle, and yet we know that this pool of Bethesda, the sheep pool, is surrounded by people. It is surrounded by people who are sick, who are in distress, who are miserable, who are paralyzed, crippled, blind, probably deaf, dumb, lame. People whose lives are a dark and depressing mess. Indeed, we have the detail when we actually come to this man. And as I quote, and not so much quote, refer to year after year, being struck by that comment which you'll remember by Metropolitan Anthony of Sourosh, who said, and here we have this man, this poor man who had been there all of this time. And in order for somebody else to be healed, for somebody else to be made whole in this very limited and imperfect miracle, they'd all climbed over him. They'd all overtaken him. They'd stepped over somebody in misery. Somebody who many of them probably knew had been in this misery for 38 years. We're not told how many years he'd spent there in this season of blessing and miracle, waiting for the stirrings of the waters. But we can guarantee it's probably for the vast majority, if not all, of his adult life, that he has hoped. He's continued to hope. All of the people that surrounded these waters were there because they hoped. And year by year, this man was overtaken. He was beaten to the waters. Perhaps he was trodden on. Perhaps his fingers had gone under the feet of others, that others had clambered over him. He may even have been injured and hurt in this clamour. Because I don't think we can presume that this is a very British occasion, when people are very polite and they all wait in great order. Nobody says, oh please, you first, after you. Ladies before gentlemen. Nobody is saying this here. It is everyone for themselves as they try to get into that water desperately before anybody else. Imagine the scene. It's not just that one person gets there first and gets in the water. Imagine it. It's like a pool, a public swimming pool. It's full of people. People aren't just stepping in. Those who can are probably more or less water bombing to get in there. They are jumping in there. Some of them are being thrown in there by their friends probably. A leg and a wing. Sploosh. This is an aggressive scene. An aggressive scene of competition. And yet all because people continue to hope. It's hope that made this a great scrum and a scramble to get in there first. It's hope that brought people back year after year after year, despite not one disappointment, but 10 disappointments, 20 disappointments, 30 disappointments, being overtaken 30 times, being beaten 30 times, going home absolutely forlorn because you are still blind or paralyzed or deaf. Going home yet again, not having been able to be the one who got into those waters. When we look at pictures, certainly I think of the Bible that I took to Sunday school with me year after year with lovely big pictures. It didn't show anything like this. It didn't show people competing in order to be the one. The fact that some, yes, were probably pulling others by the clothes, pulling people by their hair, pushing them out of the way, elbowing them, shoving them, tripping them up. And yet all because of hope. It's a picture that is both touching because they all hoped, and yet is so disturbing because they all competed, probably quite viciously, to be the one to receive the miracle. This is a very imperfect and very troubling scene. And into this scene walks Christ. Christ walks into this precinct in which one person has received healing and wholeness. Just one person. And what we need to remember is that Christ knew everything that was happening here spiritually. Christ, who was the Word, who was there in the beginning. Christ, who was God. Christ, who was the Creator, who created the angels as well as us. That the same Lord that walked into Bethesda, into this pool of 5 porches, was the same Creator who had created the angel who came down to stir those waters and to bless them and to touch them. So, even this limited miracle, we might say, came through the Creator, Christ himself. And then Christ comes in. It's interesting, if you reflect on the readings that we had, that the apostle reading that you heard was also one about resurrection. I say also, you may be saying, well, what's this miracle at this pool got to do with resurrection? It is an image of the resurrection. In the apostle we hear of Tabitha being raised up. In this we hear about this man being raised up. This paralyzed, crippled man being raised up. Why is it that whenever we think of resurrection, we simply think of the resurrection of the dead? If you ask people, what is resurrection? You can guarantee that 9 out of 10, and very often 10 out of 10 people will say, oh, it's about rising from the dead. When Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life, he hadn't yet gone to the cross. He hadn't yet died. He hadn't yet risen from the dead. And yet still he declared, I am the resurrection and the life. And what we see for this man is the resurrection at work. Don't think resurrection is only the resurrection of the dead, because if we think in that way, we're missing the point. The pool here becomes an image of the font. It becomes a symbol of baptism also. And baptism is our initiation into the resurrection of Christ. Before we die, before we're put into the earth, before the final trumpet blast of the angels in which we will be physically raised up, we are still called to be part of the resurrection. We've celebrated Pascha. We've celebrated the power of the resurrection. And this power of the resurrection needs to be working in our lives now. Even before Jesus died, even before Jesus physically rose, we can actually say the resurrection is at work here. The resurrection is working in this man. Jesus, of course, says to him, do you want to be healed? Do you want to get up from down there? Imagine spending your life down there. Think about it. Seeing life at ankle level, seeing life from people's knees, living in the dust, living in the dirt, seeing other people run around, walk around, enjoy themselves. People doing the things that we all take for granted. And Jesus still says, do you want to be healed? Who would say no? Who would say no? What we need to remember is there's a spiritual aspect of this as well. It's not just about this paralytic man being made to be able to walk. There's a spiritual process going on as well. Remember, Jesus says later on, go away and don't sin anymore. Change, in other words. Change your life. Imagine what this man's life was like afterwards. That this great man had come and he had raised him up from a life of misery and suffering. He would be forever grateful to this man who came along. And he would be going away asking the questions. How was this done? By what power have I been taken from this state in which I lived? I didn't need to go into the pool. I didn't need to be the one to get there first. In fact, something greater has happened to me, because even without this rippling and this miracle for which I've waited, a greater miracle has happened to me. And I have been made whole and told, well, if you want it, get up, and for a start you can pick up that bed. You can pick it up. You can show how much you want this. You can take part in this miracle. This is a wonderful image of the resurrection. This man who led a life of darkness and misery was raised up from that life. He was changed. The old man, if you like, was left behind at Bethesda. A new man emerged in all of this. And that's the same for all of us. Don't think that resurrection is only for the future. If you understand resurrection now, you will be struggling in your spiritual lives in order that you can be changed, that you can be raised up, lifted up, pulled up by Christ, and by Christ in and through the church. When you feel the word of God inside you, burning within you, as it did for those men on the road to Emmaus when they met Christ and didn't recognize him. The power of the resurrection is working in you. When you feel remorse for the stupid, sinful, destructive things that you've done in your life, from when you were down here to wherever you are now, and you want to change, then that is the power of the resurrection working in you. When you come to confession and you sincerely confess your sins and you say to the Lord, Lord, I want to change. Lord, I want to get away from this. I want to be a better person. I want to act for you. Then that is the power of the resurrection working in you. Think back to Lent. Think of the Sundays we celebrated. When St. Mary of Egypt stood outside the Church of the Resurrection, the Holy Sepulchre, and she was stopped from entering in. And she desired with all of her heart to confess her sins and change her life. That was the power of the resurrection working in her. And we look at the lives of the saints, and again we see the power of the resurrection working in them. Christ offers us this power now. Not as dead bodies, now. In baptism, he offers us the resurrection. In confession, after baptism, when we've messed up and we've gone wrong, Christ offers us the power of the resurrection to work in us. When you hear the Holy Gospel being read and you hear the law of God, Christ gives us and offers us the power of the resurrection. When we partake with faith of the holy mysteries, knowing that this is the divine medicine, which comes not to pat us on the head and reward us for being good. Oh, I deserve communion this week because I haven't done that awful habit. No, when we go there and say, Lord, I need you, I am sick, I need your healing, then he offers us the power of the resurrection. When we go to somewhere like the Kiev caves and we see the miracles working through the relics of the saints, that is the power of Christ's resurrection. That is the grace of God, which is here to transform us now, at this very minute, as we are in this church. Christ who calls us to change now. Think of those people around that pool. Despite the limitations of that one person who was healed, they all lived in hope. After years of disappointment, they still lived in hope. Think of what we have been given. The resurrection of Christ, which we have not long celebrated. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, to those in the graves bestowing life. This power, this good news is our hope, and each of us is called to make it a reality now. In some way, we're all like the paralytic. We all have the things that paralyze us in life, that hold us back, that stop us from moving and living and acting in the way that Christ wants us to live and to move and to act. And as people who are spiritually sick and spiritually paralyzed, we have to come to Christ with hope. We don't have to come to a pool and look for ripples and think that we might be the lucky one. We have to come to Christ, who is the resurrection and the life, and who offers this healing and this wholeness and this transformation to each and every one of us who are here. In fact, to every single person in the world, this offer is there. For those of us who hope in him, but so don't simply hope. Those of us who want to be changed, who want to begin rising from the old person that we were meant to have put aside when we were baptized. For those of us who don't want to be spiritually or emotionally dead. For those of us who don't want to be spiritually sick and paralyzed and crippled, but who want to be touched by Christ now. And what does he say to us? Do you want this to happen? Do you want to be changed? Do you want to be healed? Do you want to move forward? If we were physically paralyzed, we'd probably scream, yes, yes, Lord, yes. If we were blind, if we were deaf, if we had some great disability, yes, we'd be shouting, we'd be screaming. And here we are now. And we know that there are things in our lives, spiritual things in our lives, where we're not so ready to shout, yes, please, because we become comfortable in the way we are. No. This calls us to look for newness, to look for complete healing, to let go of the old, and to embrace the new and optimal life which Christ offers us and wants us to lead. And that, here and now, is the life of the resurrection. Christos voskresie. Christ is risen.
Is risen indeed.
Christos anesti.
Amen.
Amen.